The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. Not because of the air conditioning, but because no one inside it believed warmth belonged to me anymore. The wooden bench beneath my hands felt smooth from decades of other palms that had rested there, some guilty, some innocent, most forgotten. I remember thinking how strange it was that history absorbed everyone equally. The judge cleared his throat, and the sound sliced through the silence, like a blade through fabric. I didn't look at him. I already knew the outcome. Verdicts are decided long before they're spoken out loud. When he finally read the sentence, his voice was steady, practiced, almost bored. 3 years. State prison.
Fraud. Großnegligence.
A financial crime so carefully dressed that it sounded reasonable to people who didn't understand how systems actually work. I felt the words hit my chest, not like a punch, but like weight. Heavy, slow, inevitable. The kind of weight that doesn't knock you down immediately but presses until your spine learns a new shape. Behind me, I heard my mother cry. She cried beautifully, controlled, elegant. The kind of tears that say, "Look how much I've already suffered." I didn't turn around right away. I waited. I wanted to know whether the sound would change if I acknowledged it. It didn't. When I finally looked back, she was dabbing her eyes with a folded tissue, her shoulders trembling just enough to be convincing. My father sat beside her, hands folded, jaw tight, staring straight ahead like a man attending a meeting he'd already won. And then there was my brother. He met my eyes. He didn't look sad. He didn't look angry.
He looked relieved.
That was the moment the last part of me that still believed in misunderstandings died. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a tragic mistake. This was choreography. Every tear, every testimony, every missing document had been rehearsed long before I walked into that courtroom believing the truth would protect me. The bailiff touched my shoulder and told me to stand. Metal cuffs closed around my wrists with a sound I still hear in my sleep. As I was led away, my mother reached out instinctively, as if muscle memory might override intent. My father stopped her with a hand on her arm. A small movement. Almost tender. Almost kind. Almost merciful. I understood then that mercy had never been part of the plan. Prison intake strips you of identity efficiently. Name replaced with a number. Clothes exchanged for fabric that never quite feels like it belongs to a human body. My cells smelled like damp concrete and something sour underneath, a permanent reminder that time here didn't pass. It stagnated. That first night, I sat on the edge of the bunk and stared at the wall until my eyes burned. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because shock is anesthetic. Pain comes later, when your mind accepts that escape is not imminent. I found a paper clip in the pocket of my issued jacket the next day. Someone had missed it during inspection. I straightened it slowly, carefully, like it might explode if I rushed. That night, I scratched the first line into the wall beside my bed. 1 day gone. I didn't know yet that I would carve exactly 1,095 of them. I just knew I needed proof that time was moving forward, even if my life wasn't. Before all of this, I had been someone people trusted with numbers, systems, and secrets. I built my career in the quiet spaces between regulations, where ethics matter more than applause. Compliance isn't glamorous. It's preventative. You only notice it when it fails. By my early 30s, companies paid me to tell them uncomfortable truths. I was good at it because I didn't flinch. I didn't belong to old money circles. I didn't inherit favors. Everything I had came from watching carefully and documenting obsessively. My parents loved telling people they were proud of me. They just didn't love that my independence made me uncontrollable. In our family, loyalty was measured by obedience. My brother understood that instinctively. He failed more, but he failed correctly. Loudly. Charmingly. With permission. When he joined the board of a mid-sized investment firm, my father called it destiny. When I warned them about irregularities months before the collapse, my concerns were dismissed as pessimism. The day everything turned began like any other. Emails. Coffee gone cold. A meeting postponed. Then my phone started vibrating nonstop. Headlines. Investigations. Accounts frozen. By the time I realized my name was being positioned as the fault line, the story had already been fed to the right people. Evidence vanished. Backup logs corrupted. Messages I had sent warning of risk were suddenly gone, replaced by documents bearing my digital signature approving actions I would never authorize. I hired a lawyer. Or rather, I tried to. My accounts were frozen within hours under an emergency order filed by the firm, supported by testimony from my own family stating I had acted erratically. Mental stress, financial pressure, poor judgment. Words that sound harmless until they're arranged to build a cage. The trial felt unreal, like watching someone else's life through fog glass. My brother testified calmly, confidently, describing conversations we never had. My mother spoke of sleepless nights, of worry. My father framed my ambition as recklessness. They didn't lie loudly. They lied reasonably. That's what made it lethal. When the verdict came, no one gasped. No one protested. Justice didn't fall. It slid into place. Back in my cell that night, I scratched another line into the wall. Then another. I pressed my forehead against the cool concrete and whispered something I hadn't said out loud yet. I will remember everything. Because forgetting is what they needed from me most. Prison teaches you very quickly that silence is never empty. It hums. It breathes. It watches. The walls listen in a way people don't anymore, absorbing every whisper, every breakdown, every promise you make to yourself at 3 a.m. when sleep refuses to come. By the second week, I stopped expecting the lights to ever turn fully off. They dim, but they don't disappear. Neither does the noise. Somewhere always a door slams. Somewhere always someone cries. And somewhere inside you, something begins to calcify just so it can survive. I learned the rhythm of the place the way sailors learn tides. Count at dawn. Stand for head count. Eat food that tastes like it gave up on itself years ago. Work detail.
Rec time.
Lock in. Nights were the worst, not because of fear, but because memory gets louder when there's nothing to interrupt it. During the day, you can pretend you're busy. At night, you're alone with the truth of how fast everything you built was dismantled by people who once kissed your forehead and told you they loved you. I kept scratching lines into the wall. Straight, even, deliberate. One day, one line. I crossed every 7th. The guards thought it was some obsessive habit. They weren't wrong. Obsession kept me sane. It gave shape to something that would otherwise blur into despair. On the 43rd day, my fingers cramped, and I laughed quietly at the absurdity of it. I had negotiated contracts worth millions without blinking, and here I was, celebrating a stolen paperclip like it was contraband treasure. The women around me came and went, some loud, some broken, some so young they still had the soft edges of people who hadn't yet learned how cruel systems can be. Prison isn't full of monsters. It's full of people whose worst moment was documented and replayed until it became their only identity. I listened more than I spoke. Listening is dangerous in there, but it's also currency. People reveal themselves when they think you're invisible. Letters arrived from my parents during the first few months. Carefully worded. Full of concern. Empty of accountability. I didn't open them. I stacked them under my mattress. Unread, a small, defiant monument to the boundary I was building. My brother wrote once. Just once. He said he hoped I was finding clarity. I tore the letter in half without finishing it. Clarity wasn't what he wanted me to find. He wanted acceptance. The kind that absolves everyone else. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my mind had never stopped working. Trauma doesn't erase skill. It sharpens it. With nothing but time and memory, I began reconstructing the case the way I would have for a client.
Timeline. Motive.
Opportunity. Benefit. I replayed depositions, testimonies, word choices. People think lies are told in what's said. They're not. They live in what's avoided. In what's oddly specific. In what's repeated too smoothly. My mother's testimony came back to me in fragments. How she'd emphasized my stress. How she'd mentioned my need for control. Phrases that sounded maternal but functioned like poison. My father's contribution had been subtler. He framed my diligence as rigidity, my caution as obstruction. And my brother had done the most damage with the least effort. He'd simply agreed with everyone else. Confirmation is powerful, especially when it comes from someone who stands to gain the most. On day 112, something changed. It wasn't dramatic.
No sudden revelation. No miracle.
It was a conversation overheard in the laundry room, of all places. Two women talking about a technician who'd been paid to lose footage in a different case. The details were different, but the mechanism was the same. Bribes don't always come in envelopes. Sometimes they come as favors. Gift cards. Promises of future work. People underestimate how cheaply integrity can be rented. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my pulse loud in my ears. The dashcam footage. The server logs. The backups that had supposedly failed. I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. A redundancy I'd set up early in my career, back when paranoia still looked like professionalism. A mirror archive stored off-network, updated sporadically, forgotten by everyone but me. I didn't know if it still existed. I didn't know if it would matter. But the possibility was enough to shift something inside me. Hope is dangerous in prison. It makes the days longer. But strategy gives hope discipline. I stopped thinking about release dates and started thinking about leverage points.
Who would need to talk?
Who would fold first? Who would protect themselves at the expense of everyone else? Families unravel the same way corporations do.
Slowly.
Then all at once. The first year ended without ceremony. I carved the final line for day 365 and sat back on my heels, studying the wall like it might speak back. My body had changed. Leaner. Harder. My eyes felt older. But my mind was clearer than it had ever been. I understood now that the mistake I'd made wasn't trusting the wrong people. It was assuming blood made betrayal unlikely. Power doesn't care about genetics. It cares about proximity. During my second year, the letters stopped. I suspected the silence wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Silence lets time do the dirty work for you. It erodes resolve. It makes people forget details. I refused to forget. Every morning, I recited facts in my head like prayers.
Dates.
Names.
Amounts.
Who had been where? Who had signed what? I knew that if I ever got the chance, I'd need to be precise. Precision is credibility's closest ally. The turning point came quietly, delivered in plain white paper with no return address. 1 page.
No greeting. No signature.
Just a sentence that made my chest tighten. A file name. One I recognized instantly. A naming convention I'd used for off-network backups. Something no one could guess unless they had access to my old systems or my old habits. Time preserves what people try to bury. I read it until the words lost meaning and became shapes. Then I folded the paper carefully and hid it behind the loose brick near my bunk. For the first time since my sentencing, I smiled. Not because I was free, but because I wasn't finished. From that moment on, everything became preparation. I kept my head down. I stayed out of trouble. I refused visits when they were offered again. I didn't need theatrics. I needed distance. I needed them comfortable. People make mistakes when they think the danger has passed. On the last night of my sentence, I scratched the final line into the wall. 1095. My hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. Prison had taken 3 years of my life. My family had taken much more. But they'd also given me something unintentionally valuable. Time to see them clearly. As the lights dimmed and the familiar hum filled the air, I pressed my palm flat against the wall, feeling the grooves I'd carved into it. Proof that I had existed here. That I had endured. That I had remembered. Tomorrow, the gates would open. And the truth, long buried under signatures and silence, would finally have oxygen. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, wrapped in paperwork and fluorescent light, delivered by a guard who doesn't know your name and doesn't care to learn it. The morning of my release, I woke before the count, heart racing, convinced something would go wrong, that they'd find a clerical error. that someone would suddenly remember another charge. Prison teaches you not to trust endings. When my name was finally called, it sounded unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. I folded my clothes with the same precision I once used for boardroom meetings, smoothing out creases that no one would notice. I left nothing behind. Not even the letters. Especially not the letters. Some things are better carried in memory, where they can't be confiscated. The final door buzzed. The last gate slid open with a sound that should have felt triumphant, but instead felt hollow. Outside, the air was sharper, colder than I remembered. It hit my lungs like a question. What are you going to do with this? They were waiting for me. Of course they were. My parents stood just beyond the barrier, wearing the expressions they'd practiced in mirrors.
Concern.
Relief.
Love.
My brother hovered slightly behind them, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the parking lot instead of my face. A family portrait arranged for witnesses. For anyone who might be watching. For the story they'd already rehearsed. My mother moved first. She always did. She reached for me like she used to when I was a child, arms open, voice trembling as she said my name. I let her hug me. I let her cry into my shoulder. Not because I needed it, but because I needed to see it up close. Lies have texture. I wanted to feel it. My father cleared his throat and said how proud he was of my strength. My brother finally met my eyes and nodded, as if we were colleagues acknowledging a difficult project.
No apologies. No accountability.
Just relief that the waiting was over. On the drive home, they filled the silence with updates. Neighbors who had asked about me. Friends who had never stopped believing. Legal fees that had nearly ruined them. Sacrifices they wanted credit for. I watched the scenery slide past and cataloged every word. People reveal what they think matters when they believe they've won. Home felt smaller. Or maybe I had grown. The furniture was rearranged. My old room had been converted into a storage space, my belongings boxed and labeled like artifacts from a discontinued life. My mother offered to cook dinner. My father suggested rest. My brother mentioned opportunities, consulting work, temporary roles, favors he could call in. That was when I understood their strategy. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted containment. They wanted me dependent, grateful, quiet. A redeemed cautionary tale they could point to whenever guilt threatened to surface. I smiled. I nodded. I played my part. Survival had taught me patience. Revenge, real revenge, requires timing. That night, alone in a room that no longer felt like mine, I powered on an old laptop they'd forgotten about. The battery barely held a charge. The fan whined like it was protesting resurrection. I typed in a password I hadn't used in years. Access granted. The archive was still there. Years of mirrored data.
Logs.
Metadata. Time-stamped backups that told a very different story than the one presented in court. Files that showed edits, deletions, overwritten segments. Names of technicians. Authorization trails. The digital fingerprints people assume no one will ever check. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I closed the laptop slowly and sat in the dark, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't just proof of my innocence. It was proof of intent, of coordination, of benefit. The next morning, I told my family I needed time.
Space.
Healing. They nodded enthusiastically, relieved. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city, paid for with what little remained of my frozen accounts after legal deductions. I kept it sparse. No photos. No history. Just a desk, a chair, and a lock on the door. That's when the real work began. I contacted no one from my old life at first. I didn't announce my return. I didn't post updates. Silence is disarming. Instead, I reached out through back channels. Old favors I'd once granted quietly. People whose careers I'd protected. Whose mistakes I'd helped bury legally, ethically. They remembered me differently than the headlines did. One of them was Mara. Mara had been an internal auditor before burnout pushed her into private consultancy. Brilliant. Discreet. Cynical in the way only people who've seen systems from the inside can be. When I sent her a single encrypted message, just a file name and a date, She responded within an hour. Where did you get this? I made it, I wrote back. We met in a cafe that smelled like burnt coffee and anonymity.
She didn't hug me.
She didn't ask about prison. She asked about timestamps, about chain of custody, about what I wanted. I want the truth, I said. And I want it documented so thoroughly that no one can dismiss it as revenge.
She smiled then.
Not kindly, respectfully. Over the next months, we built a case the way surgeons build muscle memory.
Slowly.
Methodically. We reconstructed financial flows that showed how my conviction had benefited my brother's company almost immediately. How contracts shifted. How assets transferred. How silence was rewarded. We found the technician. He folded faster than I expected. People who sell integrity rarely die on that hill. He gave us emails, payment records, instructions forwarded from a law firm my parents had hired for my defense. That part hurt more than I thought it would. The firm had known, or suspected, and had chosen strategy over truth, plausible deniability over justice. Mara documented everything. Every conversation was recorded, every claim cross-verified. We weren't building a story. We were building a ledger. When the time came, we didn't go to the police. We went public. The first article dropped on a quiet Tuesday morning.
No sensational headline.
Just facts. Timelines. Documents embedded directly into the piece. By noon, it was trending. By evening, my brother's stock had dipped noticeably. By morning, it was in free fall.
My parents called me that night.
My mother cried. Real tears this time. She said she hadn't known how far it had gone. My father's voice shook with anger. Not at himself, but at me. At the embarrassment. At the exposure. My brother didn't call at all. I listened. I said very little. When my mother asked what I wanted, I answered honestly. I want distance, I said. And I want you to stop pretending this was an accident. The next weeks were relentless. Boardroom resignations. Emergency shareholder meetings. Interviews where my brother looked smaller every time. The law firm issued a carefully worded apology and settled quietly. The technician entered a plea deal. And then came the final confrontation. They asked to see me together. Neutral location. Mediator present. I agreed, not for closure, but for documentation. My brother spoke first. He said he never meant for it to go that far. That things had spiraled. That he'd assumed I'd fight harder. That prison had been unfortunate. I looked at him for a long time before responding. You didn't think I'd survive, I said. And you were willing to live with that. Silence filled the room. The mediator shifted uncomfortably. My parents asked for forgiveness. Not because they understood, but because consequences had arrived. I told them something prison had taught me. Forgiveness isn't a requirement, I said. It's a choice. And I'm choosing boundaries. I stood up. I left. I never saw them together again. Today, my life is quieter. Smaller in ways that matter. I work selectively. I trust carefully. I've built a family out of people who didn't need me to suffer in order to succeed. Truth has a cost. So does silence. I paid mine in years. They paid theirs in reputation. If you're watching this from somewhere you never thought you'd be, if betrayal taught you more than love ever did, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what trust means to you now. Some stories don't end when justice is served. Justice is loud when it arrives, but its echo is strangely quiet. After the headlines fade and the analysts move on to the next scandal, you're left alone with the consequences of telling the truth. People imagine revenge as a climax, a moment where everything snaps into place and your nervous system finally relaxes. That's not how it works. What comes after is heavier, more complicated, because once the lie collapses, there's nothing left to fight against. And you're forced to face what was lost without the adrenaline of pursuit. The messages started pouring in from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues, distant relatives, friends of friends who suddenly remembered believing in me the whole time. Support has a way of finding you once it's safe. I read some, ignored most. Validation after the fact feels like applause at a funeral, well-intentioned, but too late to change anything. My brother's company didn't collapse overnight. It bled. Investors pulled out quietly at first, citing uncertainty. Then partners distanced themselves, careful not to use words like fraud or conspiracy. The market doesn't punish morality. It punishes risk. And he had become radioactive. Every interview he gave made things worse. He spoke in circles, used passive language, blamed processes, blamed advisors, blamed stress. He never blamed himself. I watched one interview alone in my apartment. Volume low, lights off. He looked older than me now. Thinner. His confidence, once effortless, had curdled into defensiveness. For a brief moment, something like pity surfaced. It passed quickly. Pity assumes innocence. Understanding does not. My parents retreated from public life almost entirely. They sold the house I grew up in. Too many memories, my mother said to a neighbor. What she meant was too many mirrors. They moved somewhere quieter, smaller, where no one knew their names. I didn't help them. I didn't block them either. Distance isn't punishment. It's maintenance. What surprised me most was how the system responded once it became clear I was right. Not with outrage. With discomfort. Institutions don't like being reminded of their fallibility. The appeals process moved faster than it ever had before, greased by embarrassment rather than remorse. My conviction was vacated on procedural grounds first. Later, quietly, it was overturned entirely. No press conference.
No apology.
Just a document uploaded to a database. Most people will never search. Officially, I was innocent. Unofficially, I was still marked. That's the part no one prepares you for. Exoneration doesn't rewind time. It doesn't restore the years you spent measuring days in scratches on a wall. It doesn't erase the way people look at you when they think you can't see it. The pause, the calculation, the question they'll never ask out loud. I started therapy at Mara's insistence. Not because I felt broken, but because I had stopped feeling anything at all. Numbness is efficient. It lets you function. It also hollows you out. The therapist asked me once what I missed most from before prison. I didn't say freedom. I said ease. The ability to trust my own assumptions. To believe that effort led to outcome. That fairness was a variable you could influence. We talked about my family often. Not with anger. With forensic distance. Trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it testifies calmly, presenting evidence one memory at a time. I realized that the betrayal hadn't started with the accusation. It had started years earlier, in small moments where my success was reframed as threat, my independence as disloyalty. The trial had only formalized what was already true. Work came back slowly.
Carefully.
I turned down more offers than I accepted. Power dynamics matter when you've been stripped of agency once before. I chose projects where transparency wasn't a buzzword, but a requirement. Where documentation mattered. Where systems were designed to be questioned, not defended. People sometimes asked if I was angry. I told them anger requires energy. I had learned how to conserve mine. The final loose end tied itself unexpectedly. A message from my brother, sent months after the last article ran. No subject line. Just a paragraph that read like a draft he'd never intended to send. He said he was tired. That he'd convinced himself I would recover faster than I had. That he hadn't thought prison would change me so fundamentally. That he didn't recognize me anymore. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. That's because the version of me you knew required your approval, I wrote. I don't anymore. I didn't ask for accountability. I didn't offer forgiveness. I closed the laptop and went for a walk. Some evenings, I still wake up convinced I'm late for count. Muscle memory doesn't care about justice. But those moments pass more quickly now. I remind myself where I am, who I've become, what I survived without surrendering my name. If there's one truth I carry with me, it's this: betrayal by family doesn't end your capacity for connection. It just teaches you to choose it deliberately. Blood may introduce you to the world, but it doesn't get lifetime access by default. I don't tell this story to be admired. I tell it because silence is how these things repeat. Because somewhere, someone is being framed by the people who taught them how to speak. And they think enduring quietly is the same thing as being strong. It isn't. Strength is remembering.
Strength is documenting.
Strength is refusing to disappear so others can stay comfortable. And if you're watching this from a place that feels smaller than it used to, if trust has become something you ration instead of give freely, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you've learned the hard way. Some truths don't set you free. They teach you how to live without permission. And when you stop asking the people who broke you to make you whole, there is a strange moment that comes after everything is settled, after the court documents are filed away, after the last article is written, after the phone stops ringing. It's the moment when you realize that the fight is over, but your body hasn't caught up yet. You're no longer in danger, but your nervous system still lives like you are. I used to think healing was a destination, a place you arrive at and unpack. Now I know it's closer to learning a new language, one you speak awkwardly at first, with a heavy accent shaped by everything you've survived. I didn't rebuild my life dramatically. There was no montage, no triumphant return to who I used to be. That person was gone, and I had stopped trying to resurrect them. Instead, I built something quieter, something honest. I learned to wake up without immediately scanning for threats. I learned to sit with silence without feeling like it was about to accuse me of something. I learned that peace isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up when you realize an entire day has passed and you didn't once need to defend your existence. The people I let close now are nothing like the family I was born into. They don't share my blood. They share my values. They don't ask me to explain my pain in a way that makes it easier for them to digest. They listen without trying to soften it, without trying to rush me toward forgiveness like it's a moral obligation. We cook together. We argue sometimes. We disagree without threatening each other's survival. For a long time, I didn't realize how radical that was. There was a night, about a year after everything ended, when we were sitting on the floor of my apartment, takeout containers scattered around us, laughing about something completely insignificant. And it hit me, suddenly and without warning, that this was what safety felt like. Not perfection, not certainty, just the absence of fear. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried quietly, not because I was sad, but because I finally understood what I had been missing my entire life. People still ask if I regret going public, if it was worth it. They usually ask in hushed tones, as if the answer might indict them too. I tell them the truth. I tell them that telling the truth cost me everything once, and then it gave me something I'd never had before. Ownership of my own story. When you've been framed, silence feels like survival. But silence is expensive. It charges interest. It takes years off your life in ways no sentence ever could. I no longer measure my success by visibility or applause. I measure it by alignment, by how little I have to pretend, by how rarely my chest tightens when my phone rings. I work on cases now that most people would call thankless. Situations where systems failed quietly, where no one is eager to admit fault. I don't need recognition for it. I know what it feels like to be on the other side of indifference. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about my parents. Not with longing, with curiosity. I wonder if they ever tell the story differently now. If they omit details. If they frame themselves as victims of circumstance rather than architects of it. I no longer need to correct them. People who rewrite history usually do it because the original version is unbearable to live with. As for my brother, I've stopped checking. Knowing how he's doing stopped being relevant once I understood that closure doesn't come from watching someone else suffer. It comes from no longer organizing your life around the people who harmed you. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And indifference, I learned, is earned. What prison taught me, more than anything, is that identity is not what you're accused of, nor is it what you're praised for. It's what remains when both are taken away. When you're stripped down to routines and breath and memory, you find out very quickly who you are without witnesses. That version of me, the one who scratched days into a wall and refused to forget facts, that's the version I trust now. I used to believe family was a fixed thing, a biological contract you were morally required to honor no matter the cost. I don't believe that anymore. I believe family is proven. It's consistent. It doesn't require your destruction to sustain itself. Blood may explain where you come from, but it doesn't get to dictate where you're allowed to go. If you're listening to this and something in your body feels tight, if a name immediately came to mind when I talked about betrayal, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for loving people who hurt you, but you are not obligated to keep bleeding just to prove you have a heart. Survival is not bitterness. Boundaries are not cruelty. And walking away does not mean you lost. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because somewhere someone is being slowly erased by people who claim to love them. Someone is being told that silence is maturity, that endurance is virtue, that family should always come first even when family is the one holding the knife. I am living proof that this narrative is a lie. Life after truth is quieter. Yes. Smaller in some ways. But it is also real. And real life, I've learned, is infinitely more sustainable than any performance you were forced into just to belong. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you.
Truly.
And if this story connected with you, if betrayal reshaped the way you see trust, I want you to do one thing. Tell me where you're watching from. And tell me, honestly, what trust means to you now. Because some of us don't survive by being saved. We survive by remembering who we were before anyone convinced us we deserved to disappear.